From news and product reviews to husbandry, habitat, and conservation, we discuss all things reptile. With special guests from all around the world, we talk about the reptiles we keep, the unique ways we keep them, and how we can work together to push herpetoculture forward and preserve the species we love. From the guys who brought you Greg's Reptile Studio and Hudson Valley Reptile and Rescue, this is the Reptile Studio.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Reptile Studio podcast with myself, Brian from Hudson Valley Reptile and Rescue, and Greg from Greg's Reptile Studio. We have the pleasure of speaking with Dillon from Animals at Home, right? I believe is the name of your podcast. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm a terrible host. And
no, that is correct.
I don't look up any of my guests beforehand. I just kind of shoot at the hip and do what I can.
That's the way to do it. No, you are correct. Animals at Home.
Okay, great. And you do have quite a following already, right? If I'm not mistaken. I mean, in terms of the actual amount of views you get on your podcasts, I am one of them very briefly. But, you know, I love your content that, you know, the titles and things that I've seen that I don't have time to sit down and watch, unfortunately. But
yeah, the following is growing. I don't know if I would say already, because it feels like it's been a while that I've been building it. But yeah, we've just hit 10,000 subscribers a couple months ago on YouTube, and each
excellent.
Episode gets, you know, a couple thousand views normally.
Good. That's great. That's absolutely fantastic. Couldn't happen to a better organization. You know, I know it's you as a one-man show, but you know, when you put your opinion out there about the information that you're bringing to the table, it's really good. I saw that you did a couple round table or some panel discussions. I don't remember what you called them. I did watch one of those for a brief, all of like 5 minutes, because they're an hour long, and I work with rescues, so I don't have an immense amount of time to do anything that doesn't involve cleaning poop. So I seen that you had a few guests on there. I believe Mariah Healy was one of them. And then I think there was a vet, and I the name escapes me, and I really apologize for that. But there was some really in-depth topics on that particular group that I had watched, and it was all really awesome stuff. People trying to come together in the hobby, people trying to put their information out there of, you know, we can do this better, so on and so forth. And I guess that would lead me to my first question for you. What was the deciding moment, you know, where you went from a reptile enthusiast to somebody who, you know, a reptile keeper to somebody who wants to change the way things are being done, or at least bring the information to light that things could be done differently?
Well, I think that's probably a pretty long answer. So I'll give you the long answer version, because it's probably worth kind of unpacking it. I've you know, kept reptiles for years, probably 15 plus years. And I started keeping geckos. And in that time, I was always somewhat, you know, wanting to focus a little bit on adding natural elements into the enclosures and plants and climbing branches and whatnot. You know, when I first got my crested gecko, looking at, you know, photos of New Caledonia and whatnot and trying to replicate that. And I actually wasn't really into snakes when I first got into reptile keeping. So I think I was somewhat sheltered from sort of industrial keeping, but also sheltered from, I live in a very small community. So I was sheltered from the amount of bad care that there is in herpetoculture, and everybody's super familiar with that. Just go to Craigslist and scroll, you'll see what's there, and it's sort of a nightmare. And I eventually did get into snakes, and I ended up buying my second boa came from a lady who was selling him or selling her off of the Canadian version of Craigslist. It's called Kijiji, and this animal was in really rough shape. I remember this lady telling me, like, it's a snake, it doesn't need heat, you know, things like that. And so I ended up buying this animal, or taking it off her hands, really. And it was, you know, full of stuck shed, very underweight. And that really woke me up to think, okay, there's a lot of, like, this lady literally knew nothing about keeping reptiles. And I thought, how did that happen? Because when I would get into a reptile, I was obsessed with the research, and I would do like as much as I can, you know, reading and looking at photos and, you know, going on forums and whatnot. This is, you know, 15 years ago. So Facebook wasn't really around, and even YouTube wasn't that, you know, that built up at that point. And I thought, how do people end up with reptiles that don't care for them? And so that kind of started my thought process. And so then I was sort of made myself a goal to push my care as much as I can. And this is even before Animals at Home even existed. I was just attempting to, you know, increase the enclosure size and add natural elements and enrichment into the enclosures. And, you know, eventually you get to a point when you try to do that, you realize if you're trying to make this perfect environment like a piece of the Amazon rainforest, then why do I even have the animal in captivity? Wouldn't it make more sense for this animal just to not be in my bedroom and for it to just be in the wild? And so I hit that sort of ethical wall where I thought, is this even right for me to be keeping these reptiles? I mean, I love them. I'm trying to keep the best care I can for them, and I'm trying to do my best. But at the same time, is there any benefit for them, or is this just all me? Am I just enjoying this myself and it kind of sucks for the animal? And I wasn't sure. So I kind of had to step back. And that's when I started sort of realizing that we needed to justify captivity. And I also found this quote. I wish I knew where it came from. I think I read it off a forum somewhere. So who knows who said it, but the quote was basically, the better the care, the more your animal will reward you with their fascinating natural behaviors. And that totally clicked to me. I thought, yeah, when you add elements of nature, you start to see your animals do things that you wouldn't otherwise. If you add climbing branches, if you have an arboreal species, all of a sudden they're climbing, and that's exciting and that's fun. There's nothing more exciting than seeing an animal behave naturally in the enclosure that you built for it. So I started kind of going down that path, and then so Animals at Home came along. This was even before the podcast. I started sort of just doing, somewhat care guides, but also more like DIY type things on YouTube,
Okay.
where I was doing projects. And eventually I hit the point where I was like, I don't have any more content to build. I don't feel comfortable making care guides or doing like the pet tube, buy an animal, do an unboxing, do a pet setup, and get into that vicious cycle. So that's when the podcast came to me, and I said, that would be a way for me to continually build content by talking to people and then picking other people's brains and not feeling the pressure on myself to have to, give everybody this like gold standard information. So that is how I kind of started going down the ethical path, and how the podcast got folded into that, with a focus on, improving herpetoculture as best as I can.
That's a full journey right there.
Yeah, it's a full journey.
Yeah, no, that's a very similar thing. When I was first getting into reptiles, I had a bearded dragon, I had king snakes, corn snakes, the whole lot of them. This is about 25 years ago, give or take. And keeping and breeding was my aspiration. And then ultimately, it was like, oh my goodness, these animals are like, nobody has a clue how to keep a bearded dragon alive outside of a reptile person. If you're not a reptile person, man, I don't really think I want to give you a baby animal, even if you're paying me for it. So I developed that 17 years ago, that same kind of moralic dilemma or ethical dilemma, as you had described it, and was like, I don't really want to breed anymore. And then we opened the rescue's doors. We started taking in things, 1, 2, 3 at a time. And then here we are in full swing 17 years later. But it's a matter of a path that you have to walk to be able to change your ideals. And it's a great story, a great story. And that's a great path to walk too. Greg, you got anything?
I was actually going to say, it's funny because my path keeping reptiles was like, I don't know, I was probably like 5 or 6, the first time I started keeping. And there was a long stretch of time where I didn't keep any reptiles at all, until I would say a few years after high school. And it was just one reptile. I had a leopard gecko that I still have. And all of a sudden, I want to say it was when COVID hit. When COVID first started, I all of a sudden was like, you know what? I need to get a snake. So I was like, I'm going to get a snake. And I got a corn snake. Then I'm like, I need another snake. And I got a ball python. And I'm like, all right, so, hold on a second. So now I got this, and this. I said, let me stop for a second and refocus and figure out exactly what I need to do. And so I had a camera. I had my own Instagram, and I was like, I'm going to start an Instagram. And I was like, I don't want to just get a pet and take pictures of the pets, set up the pets. I was like, I want to actually display my passion, my for photography, and do it very like low key, as far as not making it about how I'm taking care of the reptile, but making it about how the reptile is taking care of itself in my possession, basically. I don't even like the word possession, but that when you started talking about that, Dillon, that's what made me. Oh wait, how am I? That's what made me, do that. I'm just gonna go somewhere else with that. That's all right.
Okay, it happens to everybody.
I completely lost it. So.
So you had said, Dillon, that you've been keeping for like 15 years ish, right?
Yeah, I started, about 15 years. Yeah, I think I started keeping in 07.
Okay. Very, very awesome length of time to have experience and gained experience. And I definitely, I look at people sometimes and I'm like, man, I don't think I can do that part. Like, I don't think I could do, I think you should know that when you're looking at somebody who's caring for a reptile. Have you said you took in that boa? Does that boa still thrive today? Is it something?
Oh yeah. She still thrives. She's done really well. I mean, boas are so hardy that they could probably live through a lot worse than that, and she recovered really
Very
well. I mean, being in such a small city, I was able to track down who bred her and everything, and I actually found other litter mates. So at the time when I rescued this boa, she was literally half the weight of the other litter mates that were, spread amongst the city. So that's how kind of the condition she was in. But she bounced back and she's just doing totally fine. She's just behind my shoulder there.
Gotcha.
And but yeah, it is kind of goes to that point where there's so much impulse purchasing in the hobby, but also just like I never understood it because I always loved wildlife. I always loved animals and nature. And for me, keeping an animal in my own room was just like sort of an extension of that passion. But then you would see people who I compare it to people who would keep like a goldfish in a bowl. Like you're not really part of the aquarium hobby. You just have a fish in a bowl. You don't have the equipment and the passion for setting up a scape and setting up the species that work well together. It's just like you went to the store, you thought that would look good on your desk, and sort of the same thing. You might go to the leopard gecko and think it would look cool as a decoration, but you don't have that passion. And then without the passion, things hit the ditch really fast because you're not interested in making sure that the animal is thriving.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. 100%. I couldn't have said it better myself. It's one of those situations where if you don't live this and want the reptiles to be 100%, you can't do this. You can't be a part of it. It's not the same as owning a dog or a cat where you can kind of wing it and everything will be okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
In the same page, like I tell people every day, because of what we do and the amount of people that we influence, they come in and they're looking for something specific, and we try and cater to them, but only to a point, because my goal is to make sure that the animal that goes home with you is going to thrive in your care and not cause a conflict or become harder than you can care for. I have 100 people a month that want, or not a month, but 100 people ask me about bearded dragons, and I'm like, it's not really the pet for you. Mm-hmm. Sorry, you go away on vacations. You do. Nope. It's not a, and I just recently had somebody contact me this afternoon. They bought a snake for their child after talking to us here at the rescue about possibly adopting an already grown snake. And, I don't think they liked my answers very much. They went and bought a pet somewhere, wherever that may have been. I don't know. And they asked me a question today. They said, do you mind if we ask you some questions? I bought a snake for my son at somewhere, blah, blah, blah. And for me, that's a conflict, but I also know I'm going to answer those questions because I want that animal to be alive. I don't even care about the person. That's not, you do you. I get it. You went somewhere, you did something else, whatever. I don't care. But I want that animal to be healthy. And that's where I base all my information that I try and regurgitate. Anytime somebody asks me a question, I try and throw it right back at them. This is what we're doing. This is how I do it. You might find better results if, you live in Montana. You talk to somebody who has the same species in Montana, because I'm in New York. My humidity is different. My temperature fluctuations are different. My snowfall, all of these things are completely different. And I don't think there's just one way to do it. And I'm not like that crazy older reptile keeper that's like, you've got to keep it in a tub and keep it warm and it'll be okay. I'm open to just about anything that makes an animal's life better. Spending years in shelters, years in other things, but
yeah, exactly. You can have some nuance there, and it's actually okay to experiment with some species.
Right.
And, okay, you're going to try this. That's cool. But as long as you have that foundation of wanting the animal to thrive, then that's all that really matters.
Exactly.
Right.
And the passion's there. Go ahead, Greg.
I was just say, I think also making sure that, when we are doing those things, taking chances and risks with our animals, that we aren't keeping that to ourselves at this stage, that we, at least a good majority of us anyway, will take that information like, I've been doing X, Y, and Z, and this is the result. I think especially now that the hobby is kind of growing,
Yeah, share information.
Oh yeah, sharing is amazing. It's definitely one of those situations where you can actually have, like we're doing right now. We're in 3 separate places.
Yeah.
And all we're doing is talking. So when we start, and I mean, that's again, one reason I really respect and like your podcast so much is whether your guests are, right, wrong, in the middle, whatever the case may be, it's just a different opinion. And that's really, really important when you're talking about keeping a creature alive. We didn't know anything that we know now 25 years ago. Could you imagine the guys that pioneered this hobby in their basements in the early 70s? Like what they didn't even know what it was. You're
all
lucky
DIY, everything. Yeah.
Yeah, you're lucky if you could find the right, like book with a picture that looks kind of like it.
Exactly. Yeah.
To identify.
What do the plants look like around it? What kind of? Yeah, exactly.
Right.
You have nothing to go off of.
Where does this come from? I mean, and I make the reference all the time to the boa genre, because when boas were imported in this country, they didn't care where they came from. They're just boas. They threw them all together and they sold them all together. They're all just boas. Now here we have what, I don't even know the actual species count at this point, but it's astronomical comparatively to the 2 without the subspecies. And it's one of those situations where I learned from a guy who had been doing this forever, and he basically was like, I go to shows, I sell some babies, I do this every once in a while, and I was just like, this is amazing. Mm-hmm. He had Amazon tree boas, and this is going back probably right around 98, and he was breeding Amazon tree boas. He has retired since, he's much, much older and so on and so forth. But like, it was one of those situations where I was like, that snake is gorgeous. Mm-hmm. I've never seen anything like that. There's nothing in a pet store in New York State like that. I'm sure they had them in the city and maybe some bigger pet stores here and there and some reptile specific places that me as a younger child wouldn't have been able to go. But like, even in a zoo, I didn't really see Amazon tree boas. They had emeralds or other fascinating things. So anyway, it was just a really huge learning curve, and it was a really huge like punch in the face to, you have no idea about the natural world. Maybe it's time to do a little bit more. I knew the animals that were all around my property and where I grew up, and I knew, black rat snakes are awesome. I'm sure that's not what they're called anymore. I know they have a different name now, but it's very hard to break 30 plus years of calling something. Yeah. But at the end of the day, these guys pioneered this. And I was wondering if you had anybody who kind of like lit the fire under you and was, your inspiration for either anything, whether it's keeping reptiles or starting the podcast or something like that. You don't have to mention someone very specific if you don't want to. That's completely okay as well.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things for as far as reptile keeping goes, it's where I am in Manitoba, Canada, it's very small and isolated. So it was like very much a solo thing for me as far as reptile keeping goes. But one thing, my parents for sure inspired me on several reasons. I mean, my dad has always been an animal lover, so I think that must have rubbed off on me at some point. And he's a very like out of the box thinker. So I was when we were kids, we were constantly, catching frogs, and he was helping us set them up. And my mom is an incredibly hard worker. And I think that rubbed off on me as well. And that obviously has helped the podcast. And yeah, I think that I never had I'll say like a reptile mentor or anything like that. And because it is so isolated where I am, and a lot of it is just,
Right.
finding people online at this point who are, amazing reptile keepers from across the world. Like you said, it's amazing that we can have these connections with people from different areas, right?
It's one of the most remarkable things for me to go from like where I grew up. There was a Western New York Herpetological Society, which is huge, and it's still huge, and it's still running today. And there's tons of members, and they do tons of things together, and so on and so forth. And here I am. I'm an hour outside of New York City, and it's like there's nothing. It's no one. What who do I talk to? Oh, I find people like, we were talking about earlier before, but other close friends that live close by that we all like the same thing. And the advent of social media has made that a lot more easily attainable to find people with similar mindsets. I have a big problem with social media because I don't like the bullying and the craziness and let people do, if they're not killing their animal, let people do what they need to do. Because outside of reptile groups, there are literally people killing snakes, posting them to Facebook about how proud they are they've done it. Let's leave our fellow herpers alone, and let's let's deal with some of this public stuff, and let's worry about the herper stuff a little bit later.
Yeah, we are terrible online for the most part.
Oh.
And I would say also my listeners as well definitely inspire me. And the listeners of the podcast are constantly reaching out to me and sharing I am not a gold standard keeper. So the people that reach out to me that have listened to the show and improved their care or already have incredible care, I hear from so many people across the world that I'm just like jaw-dropping, amazing herpetoculturalists. And that definitely motivates me as well.
Excellent.
That is exactly what I was saying when I said before that I couldn't remember exactly what I was talking about.
There you go. Me? Oh yeah.
Yep, okay. We can hear you.
Your podcast actually was the podcast that made me change my approach to how I care for animals. I don't remember who it was that was on your episode, what episode it was of your podcast, but that's what made me change my situation to where you see behind me, I have much bigger racks now. And what my carpet python over here behind me is like tiny compared to all that space that she has, but she uses all that space, so that's why I think it's really important that people like you, and people like us too, now doing this, that we keep doing this stuff and saying like, no, like this is much better than keeping something in a tub. For me personally, that's my own like personal thought on that.
Well, I think that there's I'll just jump in really quick. There's one thing that's really amazing is just being able to, I should say, one thing that I like to promote on the podcast is this idea of progression. So it's not like, you have somebody who's a very basic keeper, kind of like you were saying before, Brian. It's not slamming them and throwing them on the bus and just beating them up. It's okay, that's a great start, but what else can you do with the animal? And as soon as you get that ball rolling of increasing enclosure size, adding enrichment, it becomes a positive feedback loop, and the keeper goes, wow, that is so cool. Yes. Like the first time you see your animal do something it hadn't done before is like such a positive, like dopamine blasting experience that you're like, I want to do more of that. And it just continues to grow and grow and grow, and it becomes this a snowball, really. And I think one of the reasons that my podcast has hit home for many people is we actually don't really spend a lot of time talking about reptiles. It's almost more about the keeper. What can you do as a keeper? Put the power in your hands to make a change, to make you enjoy the hobby more. And the people have just really loved that.
Right. I support any message of positivity across any platform on any social media. It doesn't matter where it is. If you're genuine and you want to help people, and that's 100% what this hobby needs. There are like, we're out of the basements. We're up. We're talking to people. We're walking around. There's a reptile on every shelf in every pet store across the United States. Okay, so what can people do? Oh, log into a Facebook group and get annihilated because they put them on the wrong substrate. Like, come on, man. Really? Maybe you could take 5 minutes out of your day since you've been keeping reptiles for 10 years and say, hey, you know, I have a better suggestion for you. I don't know if you're going to take it or not, but for me, this has worked for the last 10 years. You know, go for it. And then don't take it personally, because I don't think any of these reptile people mean to be personal. I don't really think they genuinely understand that they're attacking another human being or bullying another human being. I think they all just care for that reptile so greatly that it comes out as a, well, I know better than you. And this is what you should be doing. Whereas, you know, I've done something for 25 years, and if it's wrong, it's wrong. It happens. When I first started doing this, I didn't know anything. I'd rather learn every day.
Yeah.
Like, you know?
Well, and the interaction wouldn't go that way if it was in person. And that's the one thing. It's
Yes.
like, okay, you know, I bring you a picture of my setup in person, maybe at an expo, and you go, oh, okay, that's interesting. These are some things that I would change. You wouldn't go, you're an idiot. I hate you right now.
Right,
I'm going to give you
right.
a thumbs down. Like, it would never happen that way. And that's where social media has sort of hijacked our ability to communicate. And we are bad, especially with bringing in new people to the hobby. We just do not accept new keepers at all.
Nope.
And we have to kind of throw them through this gauntlet until they become scared. And what's the point of that?
Right. Who wants to be part of a hobby that's going to beat you up every day? I mean, unless you're like a actual competitive fighter, boxer, something along those lines, you know, you don't want to be beat up every day. Exactly. And I've been saying that for years. You know, I'd rather give people positive interactions, again, with other keepers, number one, because that's a really big part of it, having other like minds that you can have a placid conversation, you know, the same way we are right now, from 3 different areas. I'd rather be able to do that and have that person then either contact me back, feel comfortable enough to reach out to Greg because he likes his pictures and he's got the species that he works with, or so on and so forth. You know, it's that, roll that with positivity. Let's get this going. Let's get all of our keepers under one banner and stop bickering amongst ourselves, because we have a huge group of people that could do this, that could be a part of something very massive, instead of being nitpicky and controlling, for lack of a better use, or both. Right. We're divided. And it's not, I mean, it's like crazy divided. Once you leave the United States, I feel it becomes even more divided. You know, we're divided amongst ourselves here in the States, but once you add the views of a lot of these other countries, I believe you follow the animal care guidelines as well, correct? In Manitoba, you have the same sort of
it's sort of that welfare standards.
That's
they have
it.
In Europe. We actually don't have something exactly like that. That like Europe, or especially the UK, has a very like specific layout. There's like five freedoms and whatnot. And so I'm not sure if Canada even has something like that, but we're being constantly attacked. Like, I think the capital city the province I live on is about to get like exotics axed completely type thing. So
some kind of completely unfathomable, like, sustained legislation against the ownership of reptiles in general.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a shame, you know, and part of that comes from us being divided.
Yep, exactly.
You know, if we're fighting wars with each other, how can we fight a war against the people who are really genuinely coming after our reptiles? Yeah.
And they have more money, and they're bigger, and they have huge ad campaigns, and it's very tough to fight against them.
Yeah, and it's a shame that, and once legislation is in place, man, does that almost never gets rolled back.
No, it doesn't.
Almost never. You know, I'm here in New York State. I have one of the most regulated ownership states in the country. We have a lot of laws here, and I don't want to say one of the most heavily regulated, but we are very, very regulated in what we are allowed to own. Right down to, like, you know, New York City isn't supposed to have ball pythons, kind of a thing. Like, it's yeah, not that you'd never know it by looking online, really. But there's 10 million people there. What are you going to do?
There's going to be
you're not going to everybody's house and taking them from them, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the
Dillon,
day, say again.
No, go ahead.
No, you're up.
I was gonna say no, and you know, speaking of that, you know, I know that in Canada, I know that you guys have, is it reptile keepers? What the hell is the thing? Like in the US, we have oh my God.
It's like
what is
US
it
Arc,
called?
like the
Yeah, like US Arc. And I know in Canada it's like Reptile Keepers something
we
or
have something called CanHerp.
oh, Canherb.
CanHerp, yeah,
Canherb.
and it's very similar to US Arc, obviously at a much smaller scale, but very similar. Like, you know, a couple people running it, and they've done really, they're great because they do the similar work that the US Arc does. Where, I mean, in Manitoba, we had this legislation get dropped on us in the summer, and CanHerp, you know, they jumped on it immediately and started, you know, setting up ways for us to respond to the government, and we did get it pushed back, and it seemed like we might have beat it. And now I just heard, like, literally yesterday that maybe we didn't. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, we do have an organization that's sort of mirrors US Arc.
Yeah, and I would say it definitely is more of a mirror probably than even you think, because I know that from hearing other people talk about US Arc, it's literally like a handful. It's like
Yeah.
5 people basically that are running this entire situation, you know.
Wow.
So I 100%, you know, can relate to what you're talking about. I just
Yeah.
think in the US, I think because the populations are so uh tight but
Mhm.
much bigger, that it seems like it's a much bigger, you know, organization than the one in Canada.
Yeah, but it is true. US Arc it does run on very few.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really Phil, I think, is, you know, running most of it, and there's obviously people that help, but it's kind of a one-man show, a lot of it.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
And who besides you know, sort of being kind of like a one man show, you know, in your area, like who do you look up to, you know, in the community in general, or even outside of the reptile community? But who do you look for, you know, who do you look to for your, like, you know, information, you know, in the world, and especially, you know, especially about like reptiles and stuff?
Well, there's a few people that jump to my mind right away. Francis Koskiri, who's a keeper in the UK, he is literally the reptile encyclopedia. This guy knows every species. It's insane. I mean, I'm in a group conversation with him on Facebook, and that thing runs pretty much every day. And every day I can open up that chat and get, like, you know, a page out of a textbook almost from Francis, because he's just brilliant. And so he's incredible. He has a huge collection himself, and he really does pride himself on, you know, large enclosures and providing lighting and whatnot for everything. And I don't know how much money he must spend on a yearly basis on that. So he's a great resource. And Lori Torini also is someone who's amazing. She is in Colorado. She has a huge collection as well. And she's working with basically uncovering snake intelligence and seeing how far we can push these animals.
Is she the one who's doing the target training? Not to sound ignorant, but yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. The name sounded really familiar. I've definitely checked out a couple of those, and I find them to be fascinatingly promising of snake intelligence and what they're really capable of.
Yeah, it is amazing. And she's an incredible resource. She is brilliant as well. You just ask her questions about, you know, brain structure and just training, positive reinforcement, and how to train. She literally, again, will give you basically a page out of a textbook. So those two people for sure are constantly resources for me to help guide what I'm doing, because, you know, they've been doing, I mean, Lori actually hasn't even been doing it for a long time, but she already had a massive foundation of training that she's now put on into reptiles in the last few years. And so yeah, I would say those two come to mind real quick.
Yeah, Lori is like one of my favorite people. I've been following her for probably, I would say, like probably close to 2 years now on YouTube, I would say. And it's just something about the way that she conducts herself and is like so professional, but at the same time, you can reach out to her like nothing, like it's nothing, and she'll respond. She responds right away, and those type of things are awesome to me.
Oh
You
yeah,
know, she's like definitely high on the list.
Yeah, I'll even watch her videos that she does about her horses or her dogs, because it's interesting to see how you train certain things and how she breaks down certain behaviors that you want to achieve with an animal, and how much that correlates to doing the same thing with reptiles. Really, it's the same. And I mean, you only go back 5 or 6 years, I feel like, and people just thought snakes were dumb and even reptiles were dumb. And now a few years later, we have somebody who's training animals. It's training snakes. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it's remarkable. I mean, I definitely think you're right with your timing. I think it's like 5, 6 years, and you got nah, that's just a dumb creature. They don't know what's going on. In the meantime, they're rather sophisticated in the choices that they make and why they do things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing.
So what are you currently content with in the hobby? Is there anything that you'd like to, resound from a rooftop and say, this is a good thing, we're happy to have it, and so on and so forth?
Well, I think in general, there's a big number of keepers who are seeming to push for expansion of sort of the limits of care rather than, getting stuck in the cookie cutter box. Like, this is how you care for an animal, kind of like we already talked about. Like, there's some nuance there, and people are experimenting and bringing in larger enclosures and trying new things, and even people keeping outdoors and, adding different elements of nature. And I do really love that. So I would say that is one thing that I'm really happy about. And it does seem like we are on a good trajectory, I think, despite all the infighting, and we do have still lots of segregation and tribalism within herpetoculture. There is this almost a resurgence of what I think the hobby was in the 80s and the 90s, where people were really focused on, replicating nature, replicating the wild. And because that's all they had to go off of, right? We want to keep these animals alive. So let's see what they do in the wild and try to bring that here. And if you look at, I've talked to people who have friends or family who kept in the 70s and the 80s, and then that is how they kept, trying to add this sort of natural element to it. And that seems like it's coming back in maybe even a more powerful way because of social media. And we can, you see all these amazing, beautiful enclosures on Instagram and whatnot, and that just makes people want to do that. So that I'm very happy about.
Yeah, no, I think the push to keeping in much more extravagant enclosures is a phenomenal and fantastic thing. There is that I don't want to say subculture, because it seems to be a larger number than the I don't know what we want to call them, the battlers or the picky stickers, the ones that are sticking to their guns and saying everything's just fine, let's just do this, and whatever the case may be. But there is definitely a large group of people. I talk to new reptile keepers probably a lot more frequently than most people do, because the rescue, we want to adopt, we don't want to buy one. And that's a situation that opens up an entire conversation and ability. And usually I totally scapegoat the whole situation, and I just send them to Reptiles, but we won't get into that.
That's a good bet.
It's much easier than trying to type a paragraph. Am I going to say the same exact thing she said? No, but am I here to help maybe muddle through a lot of it and get that information, across to them in a way they may understand a little bit easier, as I've been doing a lot of it for years, and they may not have. To tell somebody to get surface temperature, and they're like, what that's the thing on the side, right? No. You have to temp gun, whole 9 yards, but something I do religiously every day is something that could be completely a foreign language to other people. And
exactly.
It's a great push to see animals like reptiles having a voice in both captivity and the wild, of course.
Yes.
When I first started keeping reptiles, I obviously I was keeping reptiles just to keep reptiles, and fell into that cataclysmic breed, sell, want to be popular hobby thing for the first couple of years, not even many years, but only a few years, and got out of it, like I said before, to come into a situation now where I see an outgrowing of breeder. And I can't say it's a good thing, and I can't say it's a bad thing. It's very double for me. When you look at it, if you have enough snakes to put in everybody's home, snakes become on the forefront of the pet industry, which pushes reptiles out there, which pushes something like what we're doing right now on this podcast to be a little bit more acceptable, to be a little bit more open and in everybody's home as well. Great. But then you have that other side. You have the Craigslist people who have 500 snakes that they're trying to sell all the time, or the ones that, will go drive and pick one up and then try and turn it around and sell it to someone else at a later point in time. Mm-hmm. And I think we have a lot of different reasons for people to get into this hobby. But I think if you break that back down to the what's on social media stuff and publicizing things that you can do this and you can do that and you can make this and you can make this and you can, but when we go that route, we lose that, but you can keep this animal in a little slice of nature in your house and you can make it thrive. live, exist, be content and happy, and beyond well fed, and so on and so forth. But truly remove nature and put it inside your home. Like, you're looking behind you right now, your lights are a little bright, Dylan, and I can't really see some of those enclosures.
Yeah.
But when you look at the back of, behind Greg here, there's a phenomenal landscape behind him. It's beautiful and planted, and it's just remarkable. And I never want to see an animal in something that isn't that ever again, really. Minus quarantine. I understand the reason for quarantine. Trust me, I live by it. But aside from that, that's the way to go. And that's why wouldn't that be aesthetically pleasing?
Well, I think partly what happens is people, because when I actually started keeping snakes, initially I was somewhat gravitated towards the tub keeping as well. And it didn't really last long because I was immediately kind of throwing sticks and things in there for the climb and, putting substrate in and whatnot. But partly when you get into snakes and then you hear experienced and, expert keepers telling you that this is literally all they need, it's actually almost like a relief, because you go, oh man, I can definitely do this. Like, there's no problem. I can care for this animal. You're so obsessed with the animal. You want the animal so bad that you think, okay, all I need is this tub, this paper towel, and a water dish. I can easily do that. And then it's easy to have that snowball into other animals and other animals. And, part of that too is I think people, they want to engage in their hobby on a deeper level. And we're always wanting to do something more. And the most fun you have in the hobby, I always say, is when you're working with your hands, doing something, when you're building an enclosure, when you're setting something up, when you're planning something out. And that can also go for setting up your racks and doing your breeding operation, right? Putting out your Punnett squares to come up with these different morphs and whatnot. That gives people another level of purpose within their hobby. And I think what happens is many people don't realize that there's other ways to get that purpose from their hobby, and they only see breeding as the only option to go. They're like, okay, I have 5 snakes. I'm comfortable caring for them. I'm almost bored with it. I want to do something more that re-engages me. The only step for so many people is, I guess, breeding is the next step. Like, what else is there?
A pinnacle.
Yeah.
Point. Yeah. Yep.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yep.
Where really there's so many other things you can do. You could start training. You could start expanding enclosures and doing enrichment, or you could work with a species that we don't really have in the hobby. If you want to breed, if you want to work with something a little bit rare, we don't need 10,000 more ball pythons, but maybe you can find something that is something a little bit more niche that you can bring in and start working with.
Right.
But I think we just have this, many of our role models in the hobby are the typical rack ball python breeder, and it shows people that the top of the pyramid is just that, and we kind of get distracted by that. I think you struck a good note, and I think there's also a part that you didn't cover where, when we purchase a lot of animals, I think there's this quintessential need to fulfill the financial side of what those animals are costing. And if you can make that income to be able to sustain their life and their existence, then you feel almost successful. Like, yes. I made enough money that these guys don't cost me anything, and I get to have the animals that I love. I know here in the States, and I'm not trying to speak for anybody over the world or anything, but just my own personal experiences over the amount of time that I've been doing it, I've seen that happen to good people who are really 100% caring, but they're like, it would cost me $150 a month in electric to heat 5 4x2 enclosures, but it's going to cost me, $20 a month to heat this small shoebox rack. And, another big thing is it does work, right? Exactly. Yeah.
That's if breeders' animals were dying, they'd never keep them in a rack system ever. It just wouldn't happen. But the fact that it's there and it works is part of that entirety of this whole, they're getting what they need. They're getting what they need. They're getting what they need. Look, they're breeding, they're thriving. They're, and that's, when was the last time a study was done on ball pythons? I think Reptiles and Research did something about it, about arboreal snakes, and they were reading off of I don't know his name, and I apologize for that.
Liam Sinclair.
Sinclair. And that's terrible not to know somebody's name, by the way. When we go to publish this, I'm going to look like a fool, and I don't care, because
he's a good friend as well. He'll forgive you.
Good. So, when he was talking about this, and he was reading off of this study that was done, he was talking about, introducing areas for ball pythons to climb, because they are semi-arboreal and they will climb. And I mean, this is something that, like, I had baby snakes get out when I was first in this. They pushed their tub open, whatever the case may be. And guess where they went? They didn't go down to the ground.
Yeah.
this is something I've known for 25 years, but like the fact that this dynamic is changing, like we were talking about before, where there's this push to keep things differently, to keep things better, to do better for the animal themselves, has pushed it into the fact where I don't mind saying to somebody now, pushing that envelope a little bit. I'm nobody. I'm a guy that runs a rescue, end of story. But at the same point in time, I'm a guy who has kept reptiles for 20 years. I've done it right. I've done it wrong. It has happened in both directions. I have success stories. I have a carpet python that recently passed away. She was 27 years old. I have her daughter who is 12 years old. Like I've done it right and I've done it wrong. There have been animals that have passed away in my care, but at the end of the day, number one, I'm willing to admit it. And number two, I'm also taking steps to make sure that that doesn't happen, as much as humanly possible within the rescue atmosphere, which is sometimes a little bit more difficult than, we have 70 or 80 animals at any given time. So it's a little different in construct, but at the same point in time, we're offering enclosure space, homes, things to try and alleviate the stress of like people letting their animals go or what have you. So I take a little bit of liberalties. Nope, we're not going to use that word. I take a little bit of stretch liberties. Hey, that's the word. Look at that.
I had to say it in my head a few times. I'm like, wait,
holy moly, that's a terrible thing. The power of editing. No, I'm kidding. I don't edit any. I don't care.
Just let it go.
What matters is what we learn, right? And I know it sucks if animals pass away, but at the same point in time, if you never make that mistake again, you have learned something. If you learn that something and you learn it the right way, whether the right way is learning from a person who has taught you or learning from a situation that you have, as you said yourself, you were alone in your beginnings of reptile keeping. You might have done something wrong that you didn't know. Not saying that you lost any animals, please don't misunderstand. But at the same point in time, if you did, it wouldn't have been out of the question. You had no idea what you were doing. So, and I think that's one of the parts that I don't like pet stores because a pet store doesn't tell you what you need to know.
Yes, exactly.
At least
Which is why people like me go into the pet store.
Right.
Overhear people asking questions and be like, oh, wait.
A big box pet store specifically. There are tons of very, very, very awesome mom and pop reptile stores, just to be not clear that I'm not talking about all pet stores.
Yes.
And they do a lot of business with reptiles in those big box pet stores. And the problem isn't, but that's where all the equipment is. You can buy all this equipment from them. You can get all of these new fancy things that are supposed to work. But when I walk through a PetSmart and we're in 2022 and there's a friggin' heat rock on the shelf, I have a problem with this. And for me, that's like the pinnacle of what, why? How in the world is that still a product being sold after it's killed thousands of captive reptiles across, a 30-year span of its existence? I don't get it. Why don't we learn? Why doesn't an entity like that learn? Is it solely based on a consumer situation where somebody doesn't know and they're going to buy it? Probably, because let's offer it because the money's there.
Yeah.
And if we're doing things just to make money, and this is the whole giant point to this long-winded Brian speaking story, if we're doing things just to make money, everything suffers. The hobby, the animals, everything, every part of it, because you can't focus on the money.
Well, it is one of those, I had this conversation with Ryan McVeigh because he came through, with working with Zilla. And that was one of my questions to him is, how is it that these big reptile companies, how is it that they sell products that are no good? It's just bizarre, but really there's almost no accountability for once you've got that big. And some of these companies are mammoth, right? They're absolutely massive companies, and they're protected, and they are, they need to turn a profit for their shareholders if they're a public traded company, and if not, they're just a huge company that wants to make money, and they've got to such a point where these red light bulbs, blue light bulbs, heat rocks, they just fly off the shelves, and there's no need. It's too expensive to remove them almost, and I would say chain pet stores are one of my sticking points as well. And then even the animals, like how many wild caught animals that's a huge avenue for them to come into the country and to be sold to people who are probably not going to do the work to actually understand how to care for them, right? How many animals die early on because they're dehydrated wild caught animals that go to somebody on an impulse purchase. And it's frustrating to see that as somebody who, you don't want the animals to die. And we don't really want to be supporting poaching to just what? So people have lizards at home for a year before it dies.
Right. And you go one step further with that into the pet store industry, as far as the big box ones we're talking about, and you have zero aftercare.
Yes.
They don't care. If it dies, bring it back, we'll replace it.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, things that I would do as a rescue, I'll never adopt something out that hasn't eaten at least 4 consecutive meals. Like we have this whole list of things. I'm not going to get into it, but there's a lot of certain things that these animals have to exhibit before they're even a candidate for being able to go to a new home. And in a pet store setting, you have 4 corn snakes in one small enclosure. And yeah, great. There's stuff to hide under. There's great to climb on. They have heat. They have a light. Great. I understand all that, but you're doing it wrong because baby snakes die. Sometimes they die for absolutely no reason under expert care from expert breeders that have been doing it for 30 years. Yeah. Baby snakes can die unexpectedly or go off food or yada, 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 yada. One of my big pushing points, like 5 or 6 years ago, I was trying to just convince Petco or PetSmart, I think it was, here locally, just ask for juvenile animals. Because you know what? You're going to sell them. I can't stop you there. I can't. Yeah. I get 400 phone calls a week about red-eared sliders needing new homes, but I can't stop Petco from selling them. Okay, fine. So you want to sell snakes that will live. Sell them established, juvenile of the 2 main species that they sell, which is corn snakes and ball pythons. Notoriously, those babies do not do well as babies in proper breeding environments, care given, so on and so forth. They still are reluctant to feed. They're still reluctant to do normal snake things. Now you're giving it to someone who potentially has zero understanding of any of that. And you're like, yeah, just put a pinky in there. It'll eat it.
Yeah.
Actually, I overheard one of the people at PetSmart telling them to feed it crickets, which that was, we don't need to even talk about that. I was like, well, wait, what did you say? Hold on a minute. We need to have a conversation.
Rewind. Yeah.
But at the end of the problem is corn snakes or ball pythons do make great pets, and they would thrive in people's care if they were 4 months old.
Yeah.
What you're taking them out of the egg, you're shipping them across the country or even locally, whatever the case may be, for your big box pet store, and you're setting up a new keeper for failure. Yeah. That's not an acceptable practice. That practice is probably good for business, but it is not good for that person, child, family member, friend, whatever, to continue keeping reptiles. If you have a snake die, you're probably not going to get another one. Yeah. You'll probably get a hamster because 5 years ago you could keep your hamster alive. And they need a lot more than what a hamster does. You can't just put them in a bin, put them in a 10-gallon aquarium, give them some water, give them some food, and they're going to survive. Yeah. They need a lot more of the environment to come along with that creature. And what I was going to ask you actually escaped me. So let me just double check my notes here, because I got the same thing you did, just so you know, Dillon.
Yeah, no worries.
So I guess specifically, I was going to go into that, some kind of poetic segue of what would you like to see change?
Well, that would be one thing for sure, is what do we do with the chain pet stores? I've heard people talk about, that they are a benefit, and off the top of my head, I can't even remember what the argument for them is, because there are, like you said, there's so many mom and pop stores that are so amazing. That's one area that I think needs to be mended. The wild caught animals that are ending up, common wild caught animals, the Chinese water dragons, there's a big list of ones that always come in. Yeah. I'm not sure if you guys have ever seen a list of wild caught animals from an importer. I have a few emails that come through that send me these price lists, and it's just your jaw sort of on the floor, A, seeing the prices, and B, seeing the animals that are coming in, like gaboon vipers, $25. Oh, yeah. Weird things like that.
Yep.
But I mean, obviously that's not necessarily associated with the chain pet stores, but they are a problem. They do create issues and bad husbandry, like we've said. That's one thing. And kind of along with that is, how do we collect the new keeper better? That is a serious issue. And that's kind of tied into that as well, because they don't get the right information at the pet store. They may not get the right information on YouTube either, which is where a lot of people go now, because of what the popular channels aren't necessarily going to give them the whole more holistic kind of approach, this nature, replicating nature or sort of at least progressing your care. And so I would love to see a world where we have an outlet or a place for new keepers to come to and get information without getting their faces torn off by people who have been keeping for 25 years and not immediately send them down the ball python breeding route, because there's a lot of allure to that. I can see why that's exciting to many people, but I would love to bring people into the hobby and not send them all down that hallway. And right now we're just set up for that. They just get pumped down and immediately get pumped into the morph trade.
Yep.
And so I would like to see that rectified in some way.
So how do we do that? So
yeah,
what's your idea? Do you have an idea?
Whoa.
One of the things for me is I always think, how can I get the podcast in the ears of a new keeper? And it is such a challenging question, because you have to be into reptiles before you listen to the podcast, really. Although I do have quite a few people who listen to the podcast who don't have reptiles yet, but they're already, on that side of, wanting to, explore higher level keeping. But so I've done different things where I thought, like, okay, maybe can I somehow get even a connection with a chain pet store and make it so I'm sent the podcast is going home with these people on like a QR code or something. But at the same time, it's tough, because people don't want an hour and a half long podcast. They want like a 5-minute thing or a TikTok 10-second TikTok to tell them what they need. So it is tough. There's also the expos. I think especially in the States, you guys have huge expos. How do we bring in the new people? And you're shaking your head, is it no good? Yeah.
All right.
I've never been.
So I don't mean to cut you off, but that's a huge one,
go
right?
for it.
I used to go to expos 25 years ago, and they were reptiles from all over the world. And yes, some of them were probably wild caught, obviously, because there was all of, 20,000 people across the entirety of the United States breeding reptiles at that point.
Yeah.
So for me, when I walk through an expo, I just see another animal that's going to come to the rescue. I know that sounds horrible. And I don't
you have
mean
a different
to take,
perspective.
I don't mean to take it away from people. There are great breeders out there that go to expos. That's not what I'm trying to say. I just mean, when you have this group of animals and they're ball pythons, just as an example, there's 400 ball pythons between 5 tables, where, like, that's great. They all look different, but they're all for sale, clearly. So they're not going to be staying with you. They're going to find homes. How many of those are great homes for reptiles? And how many of them are the guy walking through that expo that says, that thing's beautiful, I'm going to bring that home, I don't care what it costs, and then what happens to it after?
Yeah, I hear you. That's definitely a problem.
It's not that I'm against shows. I think they're great resources. I think a lot of the big shows are phenomenal in the way that they try and mix it up and bring a whole bunch of different people there and try and do things. But at the same point in time, I mean, if our hobby was dogs, right? And there were 400 different dogs being sold by 5 different breeders. First of all, it'd be complete chaos, because dogs don't sit in little bins. But what would be everyone's opinion of that?
Yeah, we'd all think this is too many dogs. This is not going to end up well.
Not saying that that's a really good example. It's just a different way to look at it, right? Do expos bring in new people? Yes. Do expos usually bring in new people that are actually real reptile people and stick around in the hobby? Yeah, of course it does. That's probably a much better avenue than, mom and dad wanted to buy their son a snake and they go to Petco or PetSmart.
Yeah.
But at the same point in time, if you look at the oversaturation of how many animals are available versus how many people are buying them, and who knows what COVID has done to that scenario.
Yeah.
Where do we as keepers police ourselves enough to say, when is enough enough? Is it great that you're breeding ball pythons? Sure. That means you're keeping them very well. They're healthy, they're happy, and they're breeding. Because we all know breeding reptiles is actually rather difficult if you don't know what you're doing. And if they're not healthy, they're probably not going to. Mm. But at the same token, what is the end game? Any market that becomes oversaturated, the value drops to nothing. Yep. What happens to living things when that value gets to nothing?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I mean,
Hudson Valley Reptile Rescue.
no, we don't have that kind of, no, I have anywhere from like 40 to 50 enclosure space that I could probably utilize if necessary at any mobilized moment. But at the same point in time, you know, I always keep them open because we get animals. Like I took in 2 normal ball pythons this last couple months here. No, I'm sorry. It's 2022. So before December, October and November. There was one in an apartment building in Poughkeepsie. And if you go to our Facebook page, not that you have to, but if you go to our Facebook page, you'll see some of these stories. It was in an apartment building in Poughkeepsie. The police were notified. It was 2:00 in the morning. I don't answer my phone at 2:00 in the morning. So DEC was contacted, and then they contacted me in the morning and they brought me the animal. Sloatsburg, which is a train station close to New York City, had a ball python slithering across the train tracks.
Oh, wow.
And it was brought to me. So if you do simple percentages and math, and you look at the scenario of how many animals are out there, how many rescues are out there, how many people are doing this, you know, and I'm an advocate. I 100% breed the animals that need to be bred in captivity because they're being lost in the wild. They're not around. I'm a conservationist first. I rescue second because, well, I like to keep reptiles, and I do have a couple of my own personal reptiles that I keep. But at the same point in time, not many other people do what we do. Mm-hmm. Especially here. I get phone calls from Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, out in Long Island. I get a bunch of phone calls, which is, you know, up little island off of New York, not Pennsylvania, because they don't really have a whole lot of legislation in that state. But even New Jersey, I had people come up from southern New Jersey to drop off reptiles. I've gotten calls from Iowa, which is halfway across our country, and probably not. Don't use math. I don't know distances very well most of the time, but it was, you know, it's a 16-hour drive or something like that from Iowa to New York. So when we look at things and we change perceptions, we really, these are the conversations that no one's having on social media.
Yeah.
These are the public thought, like, hey, let's all go to the expo. What'd you get at the expo? Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we need to open that window a little bit. You know, Snake Discovery is one of the channels that I watched, Emily and Ed. Mm-hmm. They're great. They do use rack systems. I'm not going to fault them for it. I think a lot of their racks are way oversized for a lot of the species that they put them in terms of not oversized, but, you know, large enough that they're a suitable enclosure. They have, in their new facility that they just got done building, they have a rescue island where people can bring reptiles, and, you know, they have a certain amount of enclosure space open, you know, but that's the first time that I saw something like that. And then a couple other of the YouTube channels that I have watched for years started doing a lot of what they take in a year. And I think that is something that needs to be brought up. And I love that part of social media. I do.
Well, yeah, I don't think I've ever talked to anybody who owns or operates a rescue, and I don't think they've ever said, hey, business is quiet. You know, it's always been like, we're tapped. We need, you know, we have tons of animals here. We're constantly getting phone calls, had to turn animals away. And part of that is this culture of, you need to have a ton of animals to feel like you have a place in the hobby. You know, if you don't have like 50, 25, 30 animals, then you probably don't have enough experience to even talk about reptiles. And that's just not true. It's actually completely false. And what it does is it promotes people to have these massive collections, and it just, for some people, they can handle it, but for most people, it's just too many animals. And what ends up happening is they eventually hit a wall at one point. Life changes, and they got to dump 80% of their collection. And now that's just, 80, right. 25 animals that are now into the community that don't have a home.
Right.
And so I would love to see, kind of getting back to how do we capture the new people, is, the social media people and the YouTube channels. How do we get those? Like, maybe one day the channels that at the top will be channels that are maybe only have 3 or 4 animals, but they're kept in really, amazing enclosures and good conditions. So people think, yeah, you only need 2 or 3 animals to feel satisfied with the hobby. You don't need an entire wall or an entire reptile room. We love reptile rooms. They're cool. I have one, everybody has one, but at the same time, like, we don't need 15, 20 animals to feel satisfied.
Right. Right. I mean, I was speaking earlier that I have my own personal animals as well. And I think I have 5 or 6 animals that are
Yeah.
my animals, and the rest of the 40 plus animals are all rescues. They're animals that are in flux. I mean, will I use them for educational purposes? Of course I do. I do bring surrendered leopard geckos or tortoises to shows if I need to not need to, but if I feel that it's appropriate and that animal will do well and not stress out very much in certain circumstances, I will obviously teach the general public anytime I can about any species that I have in my care, as long as it's not going to be negatively seen by the animal, or taken negatively, or I don't really know what the word is there. Sorry. But I talked a lot today. I did an hour demonstration earlier. So I'm like stumbling over my words. It doesn't happen often, but it's definitely something that happens at 7 o'clock at night.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
When, what is the future for your podcast, or do you have other plans in general after that? Out of curiosity.
The future for the podcast is just continue growing it. I still think there's so many ears that haven't heard it. And I don't say that because I want people to listen to me. I want people to listen to who I've had on the show. I've had so many incredible people on the show that people will listen to it and go, wow, that opened up my whole, kind of like Greg was saying earlier, changed the perspective on the way they care for animals. So I want to continue growing it. It's growing at a decent rate right now, but I want more ears on it. I'm going to continue producing a show a week for as long as I can. I mean, that is a lot of work, every single week, recording and editing a full episode.
Yep.
So I am attempting to stay on top of that. And I do want it to grow more. I'd love to bring more shows under the umbrella. I started doing that with Bryce Broom, who's a South African keeper, and he's recorded about 8 shows and underneath sort of the network. And he take a little break for a while because he had some life things come up and moved and whatnot. But I'd love to get his show continuing again and just continuing this sort of positive conversation and working on this ethical question and getting people to think about the hobby in a different way. So that's, at this point, it's just growth. That's kind of where my mind is.
Yeah. And that's great.
100% agree. So speaking of that, what, besides your boa that you had, that you got 5 years ago, what do you have now?
So I have the initial crested gecko that I first ever bought in 2007. He's just over there. I have him. I have a giant day gecko behind me. I have 2 boas. Just 2, a Central American boas, basically. Who knows what they are at this point? They're probably, one's supposed to be a Sonoran desert boa. I think it's a hybrid, but yeah, mixed bloodlines, whatever. So 2 boas, and then I have a Brazilian rainbow boa as well, and then a carpet python. Yeah, so I have 6, and that's like I almost wish I didn't have that many, in a way where I bought more animals than I needed, because I started getting into that snowball effect as well, and now I'm really wanting to focus on bigger and better enclosures. And 6 big, or 3 big snakes, not big snakes, but bigger snakes, like that's a lot of room.
They have potential.
Yeah, exactly.
Those common northern boas, those regular boas, whatever you want to call them, they definitely can attain a huge growth size, which is unbeknownst to a lot of people.
Yeah,
most of the time they see those skinny 5-footers and they're like, oh, I can handle that. Sometimes every once in a while there's that 8-foot massive. If you want to see what I'm talking about, I'm not trying to sell myself here. I can edit this out if you'd like, but I run a channel with a good friend of mine who owns and operates an educational group. He's a science teacher, and he does lectures on a really big scale. Like he's doing crazy amounts of like people lectures. 500 people on stage. That kind of thing. And he agreed to do our YouTube channel. And I mean, we are very small, but we have like 100 followers or something like that. And we do species spotlights and educational stuff. We don't do any sensationalized, craziness. It's all about like where they came from in the wild. Mm-hmm. They come into the rescue. We utilize them if we can, and so on and so forth, and he's got one of the videos that we shot was a huge 8-foot long rescue boa. That was, I mean, if she was smaller than a 2-liter soda bottle when she first came in, I'd be very surprised. But she was a common boa, not the big boy. And you know, for me, that's what I want to show the public. This is the one you see on the pet store shelf. This is what it could get to. This tiny little animal that fits in your hand right now could be this massive creature that this guy had to surrender after 10 years of having it because it tried to bite him. And he was petrified of it because he didn't handle it. It's got a mouth on it the size of my hand. Like, you have
big, powerful animal.
You got to know what you're doing, you know, what you're getting into before you do this. And I, you know, that's one of the reasons why I shy away from like local reptile groups, is because I don't want local reptile groups to know I exist. To be completely honest with you, I don't want to become this. Here you go. I don't want this anymore. I don't want this anymore. I don't want this anymore. I mean, I got 30 bearded dragons waiting to come in. You know, we've got a list of people that has become exuberant. But you know, we would love to be able to teach more and do more that way. But at the end of the day, unless you're doing something that the general public really, really wants to see, you're going to grow slow. Yeah. I've been doing an episode a week for about a year. All shot and edited in-house. We use his classroom we use his place for you know, the videos themselves, and then I learned how to edit over the last year, which if you ever watch my videos, you will definitely see how much I learned how to edit in 12 months. Because, you know, at first he looks like he was in Boca Raton, Florida. Now he definitely looks like he's in upstate New York. Color grading was a bitch, but
yeah, it's a big learning curve.
Oh my god. And this is so much better. I can edit this in like 10 minutes and just put it on. It's done. You know, I love it. But you know, we all want positive messages out. That's it. It's not like, at the end of the day, I keep going back to that statement, but it's true. Even the people who are trying to bully other people are literally just trying to get the best care advice out, and they get insulted when you don't take their care advice because it sounds like you don't care that their 25 years mattered, or 20 years mattered, or 50 years mattered, or whatever the case may be. But I think we can have a better conversation about it. And Dillon, I'd like to have you back again, by the way.
Sure, I'd love to
at some point, because this is an ever evolving conversation, right?
Absolutely.
It's definitely one of those situations where we definitely got more into a conversational side of this podcast than an actual like question and answer interview style. And I think it would.
I'd be happy to come back anytime.
I think it would be really good. What do you think, Greg? You agree?
You know, I'm on the fence about it, but I'll let them know.
You can think about it.
You're the direct contact.
I'll let you know.
I'll let you handle that. Apparently, Dillon, I'm sorry. What Greg is saying, if you couldn't understand, is that we may not have you back.
Yeah.
Let me spell it out for you. I'm the New Yorker. I'll just say it. No, but no, it was a pleasure to have you here, by the way. I don't know if we're not ending. Do we have another question, Greg? Did we? Yes, no? Or did you? I definitely forgot to ask him how many animals he had and what he kept right at the beginning. And I looked at that list like 5 times and I was like, all right, don't forget anything.
Yeah.
Don't forget anything. Oh, you forgot.
Greg brought it in the end.
It's like,
he made it work.
It's like the last moment in time possible, right?
Yeah.
Are you good, Greg? You don't have any other questions?
Yeah,
for him?
no, I'm all good. I'm
excellent.
Good for now.
Excellent.
What's
what's the name of your Brazilian rainbow boa and carpet?
Yeah, I'm really bad with names. Okay,
Me too,
so
don't feel bad.
So no, you'll see the Brazilian I call Brazilian, and the carpet python I call carpet.
Okay,
is that bad or is that great?
Better than I did. I mean, you know, I've got I don't know. I have a ton. I have a Everglades rat snake named Copper. So
see, I should come up with actual proper names. That's just for some reason I got lazy with those ones. I don't know why.
I mean, my carpet her name is Medusa. If it makes you feel any better, like what? Let's have a snake and call it Medusa. Like, okay, that's original. Good job, Brian. Why don't we have a dog and call it Ron?
Yeah,
whatever. But Dillon, I really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us for this evening. We won't take up more of your time.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I do really appreciate talking with you guys. And like I said, I'm happy to come back anytime.
Excellent. Sounds great. Thank you very much.